The 1990s of its 16-bit console war is easily my favourite time in gaming history. Both the Sega Mega Drive and Super Nintendo alike have a ludicrous amount of brilliant titles to experience on the two platforms. When it comes to game publishers, one of the kings of quality through this era were Japanese arcade giants Capcom. Capcom would give us a crazy amount of amazing games on home consoles. The Mega Man X series, Street Fighter 2 in its many revisions, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, excellent games featuring Disney characters, just to name a few. But amongst all these greats, a couple of games that perhaps do not get given as much credit as the rest are Capcom's 16-bit Marvel games. Last week we already covered the amazing X-Men Mutant Apocalypse, a Mega Man X-like game featuring beat-em-up elements. In today's upload we are going to be spotlighting yet another highly interesting title, and one of which is arguably Mutant Apocalypse's pseudo-sequel. So without further ado, hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is Marvel Superheroes in War of the Gems. Yeah! As of the start of 2023, Marvel is such a household name that characters like the second Ant-Man are starring in their third movie, facing off against relatively obscure villains like Kang the Conqueror and MODOK. It's such a drastic change from the late 90s where a nearly bankrupt Marvel were only able to get Blade, Spider-Man and X-Men movies out of the door, and vastly different from the 1960s in which many of the iconic characters were first crafted. As discussed on this channel previously, console games based on the Marvel superheroes were basically sold on the license alone, and not the quality of the game. Look at the Silver Surfer and X-Men titles for the NES for example. While Konami made an entertaining X-Men title for the arcade, based on the abandoned cartoon pit Pride of the X-Men that came before the legendary 90s cartoon in its equally iconic theme, such a title was unfortunately stuck in arcades. So Marvel home console games would remain ranging from mediocre to poor. The issue was thanks to various licensing agreements, meaning the likes of Capcom wouldn't be able to touch creating Marvel games until the right opportunity raised its head. In 1993 they grabbed such an opportunity with both hands, developing and publishing The Punisher in arcades, then the fighting game X-Men Children of the Atom for multiple formats. Before Children of the Atom made it home, in the same 30 days that the game hit arcades in Japan, 1994 would see another Capcom X-Men game, but instead released on the Super Nintendo, which of course was X-Men Mutant Apocalypse that we looked at last week. Before this glorious time in history, believe it or not, there was a day when Marvel titles were more associated with LJN trash instead of well-produced Capcom glory. The likes of The Punisher, X-Men Children of the Atom, Mutant Apocalypse, and eventually the awesome Marvel vs Capcom series were certainly massive boons for Marvel, a brand that was financially struggling at the time. In fact, the mid-90s were definitely a time of change. Marvel themselves had only barely escaped bankruptcy, and the Spider-Man and Blade trilogies weren't on the silver screen as of yet. The animated shows on the Fox Kids network, paired with Capcom's awesome games, were both proving though that there was indeed money to be made from these famous properties. It seems crazy to think how much smaller the Marvel brand was back then, with us still over a decade away from Robert Downey Jr. taking the mantle of Iron Man and starting up the Marvel Cinematic Universe that would grow to adapting aspects from the famed comic book storylines. These included the Infinity Gauntlet and the Infinity War, speaking of which inspired Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, two of the now biggest movies of all time. Back in the more humble period of 1991 and 1992, these newly written pair of stories focused on the mad titan Thanos, acquiring the famed Infinity Gauntlet, beset with the infamous Infinity Gems, that he would use with its godlike power to snap away half of existence to court death. Literally, he wants to court death. Mistress Death is the living embodiment of death in the Marvel Universe, and Thanos wants her. Ooh. As is par for the course, the heroes save the day only to continue the Infinity Saga in 1992's Infinity War, where the heroes have to deal with the fallout of the previous story, evil doppelgangers and Adam Warlock splitting into good and evil. Years before this was all reimagined in the format of supermassive Hollywood blockbusters, Capcom would make a game based around these tales of their own, which led us to Marvel Superheroes in War of the Gems. Evolving from X-Men Mutant Apocalypse, the Super NES game, the title expands past the mutant menaces to the cast of the Avengers. This includes Wolverine returning, joined by Captain America, Iron Man, Spider-Man and Hulk. Like with the previous X-Men game of this playstyle, each character has their own strengths, weaknesses and unique abilities. Captain America, for example, is all around balanced, both in attack and speed. Iron Man gains a double jump and air attack, which, given that the character is frequently known for his jet boots, seems like a downgrade. Hulk is, well, exactly what you expect of a Hulk, slow and strong, but with a low jump. Although I will say that since Hulk's known for making massive leaps across entire deserts and cities, this seems a bit more a function for the game's balancing, rather than injecting a bit of successful adaptation into the title. Adding to these we have Spider-Man, who engages his maximum spider speediness, and while the character is known for being able to throw a car and derail trains, he's got the weakest attacks of the cast. Once again, proving the balancing doesn't necessarily relate well to the characters themselves. Still, he can climb walls, which if not doing whatever a spider can, he at least does a few of the iconic things. Lastly, returning from Mutant Apocalypse, Wolverine retains his wall crawling, or more accurately, stabbing abilities. Once again, he's the star of a stealth Mega Man X game that you all slept on. You could even say this was a war of the hidden gems. Genius! Factoring in the plot of the Infinity War, villains in this game can be heroes and villains from the iconic comics, including the main cast. Making their cameos in the title are clones and threats from the blind lawyer Daredevil, the acrobatic archer Hawkeye, the Canadian heroes of Alpha Flight Puck and Sasquatch, the J Giantess She-Hulk, the hero of Yancey Street The Thing, the amazing android The Vision, the monarch of Latveria Dr. Doom and his army of Doombots, the mad titan Thanos and his granddaughter Nebula, and Ghost Rider villain and future Marvel vs. Capcom 2, who is this character? Blackheart. Everybody's here. As for the goal of this one, over the course of the game the heroes will fight for and attain the iconic Infinity Gems, which can be deployed to boost the character's skills. This is all paired with a story based on the earlier comics, with the game's introduction introducing us to its story. The game's opening crawl states,
Infinity Gems. There are 6 different Infinity Gems. Each gem controls one of the forces of either time, space, power, reality, mind, or soul. It is said that the being who obtains all of the gems will become omnipotent, ruler of the universe. Someone has started to gather these 6 gems. If they can gather all of the gems, the universe will suffer in a new age of evil. You must help, Adam Warlock asked Earth's mightiest heroes. Knowing that the fate of the entire universe is at stake, Earth's mightiest heroes assemble to assist Adam Warlock in preventing the Infinity Gems from falling into the wrong hands. As the Infinity Gems fall to the Earth, the human race begins to realize that it is in grave danger. The heroes, determined to assist Adam Warlock, began to search for the gems that have been shattered over the world. Stark Enterprises' supercomputer has pointed out 4 locations where the Infinity Gems may have landed. Near Dr. Doom's castle in Latveria, the Amazon River Basin in the central region of South America, Alaska in the northern region of North America, the Boston Aquarium in the eastern area of North America.
Now, as one will be likely able to guess, players are then tasked with tracking down these jewels across all the different locations suggested, but once gained, they can be used to upgrade your skill set. A new feature completely, which wasn't included in the X-Men themed game that preceded this one. As for the gems, the Power Gem, naturally, upgrades the player's attack capabilities. The Time Gem speeds up players' movement to simulate slowing down time. The Soul Gem upgrades the player's health gauge, doubling the damage they can receive. The Reality Gem pierces the veil of hidden items found throughout the stages. The Space Gem gives players higher jump skills, allowing them to reach further away parts of the stage. And lastly, the Mind Gem is earned when beating Thanos, and it unlocks the power of viewing the credits. Yes, the player never gets a chance to wield this mighty MacGuffin in the course of roughly an hour of gameplay for a proficient platformer. Much like its predecessor and the various Mega Man games, players can pick which stage to start off with, alongside an appropriate character to take on the journey. Midway through the game, players will learn the startling truth on who the true villain is in the game. Presented via cutscenes, Magus, the evil side of Adam Warlock, is revealed. After obtaining the second gem, our heroes have learned some valuable information. The enemy's name is the Magus. He is gathering the gems and using a huge orbiting battleship as his base. The universe will never be safe until the Magus is defeated. With that in mind, the heroes decide to charge to the orbiting spacecraft. Once the player takes out Magus, you'll find the greater threat is the obvious one: bloody Thanos. A message appears on the computer screen stating,
"I am Thanos. Hear me, heroes of Earth. Only I am qualified to possess the Infinity Gems. Give me the gems or you shall die."
Realising that Thanos is mad with power, the heroes of Earth decide to find the remaining 3 gems. The computer has pointed out 4 new possible locations: Egypt in the north of the African continent, the asteroid belt, an abandoned mining complex in Arizona, and Mount Vesuvius, Italy. With 4 new levels unlocked, the heroes fight through the stages like before, eventually gaining a total of 5 of the gems. After the heroes have collected 5 of the Infinity Gems, they next target Thanos' base. As the heroes travel into Thanos' shrine, a woman appears who states to us,
"I am Nebula. So you're the ones who seek to interfere with my master Thanos? There is no reason for Thanos to be troubled by you. I shall deal with you."
Facing off with and defeating Nebula unlocks Thanos, and by defeating him, the gems will be reunited and gathered by Adam Warlock. The game concludes with a scene once Thanos has been defeated and now the universe is safe. As Warlock looks at the gems, he says, "Thank you, heroes. With Thanos gone, the gems will be safe in my hands. I'm sure that the universe will continue on its natural course. I promise to you, I use the gems to benefit everyone. Thank you, world heroes." Lastly, the game ominously ends with the heroes make their way home back to Earth, where their family and friends await. Will the world ever truly be safe? Well, to answer this question, given that we're rounding out 2 decades of films focusing on the ever-present threats of the Marvel Universe, the answer is no, not really. The best way to describe a playthrough of this Marvel superheroes game is essentially as more X-Men Mutant Apocalypse. Playing the 2 games back to back is basically like having a go on Mega Man X, then playing Mega Man X2 straight afterwards. Both graphically and mechanically, the pairing is very similar, but at least the quality is high, meaning it won't make it feel like you're wasting your time. Like Mutant Apocalypse, the graphics are solid and attractive looking, the music is engaging, and the beat 'em up platforming looks and feels very satisfying. This is yet another example of a decent game from a time period where it felt like Capcom could do no wrong. Sadly, despite this game being a very good Capcom offering, its release at the time was largely ignored. I guess this was in part due to the fact it never showed up on the Super Nintendo until late 1996. So the Nintendo 64, Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation were all dominating players' attentions. The 16-bit era was so 1995. To be fair, if you were a fan of Marvel games, more exciting options were popping up by 1996 too. Games that would also show up on the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn in Japan. I am of course referring to the likes of the unbelievably epic X-Men vs Street Fighter, but even prior to that game's arrival, 1995 had delivered to us a game simply titled Marvel Superheroes, a fighting game that featured similar tag team mechanics to Children of the Atom. Only this time it allowed gamers to play as the wider Marvel universe, and even features the Infinity Gems, Gauntlet and a final boss fight against Thanos. This was the Infinity Wars themed game that grabbed most gamers' attentions, and in many ways, rightfully so. One would imagine the only reason such a game wasn't ported to the Super Nintendo in the first place was simply down to the fact that it wasn't powerful enough, but gamers retreated to the great Marvel superheroes in War of the Gems nonetheless. Unsurprisingly really, the title never extended past the Super Nintendo. It wasn't a cross-generation title boosting up the PlayStation library, never got a budget port on the Game Boy Advance, and likely purely on the grounds of licensing, didn't show up on the Virtual Console or as part of a collection, further contributing to the game's relative obscurity. Still, a re-release would eventually show up somewhere, with it being included on an arcade 1-up machine of all places, despite it not being an arcade title to begin with. Capcom and Arcade 1-Up put the title on their pair of Marvel vs. Capcom releases, leaving a good 2 decades between official releases. Anyway, if you enjoyed learning about this one, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell for regular doses of retro gaming history goodness. Also, be sure to check out last week's episode covering Mutant Apocalypse. Yeah, cheerio.